Special teams and the defense helped lift the Falcons over the Saints, but more importantly, it probably also helped save Raheem Morris's job.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And of course, Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network on the planet, which means it's #1 in the galaxy. Today's Locked On Falcons is sponsored by PrizePicks. Download the PrizePicks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. I'm your humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong here on Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. And on your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, we will be talking about this Week 18 game against the Saints, where the Falcons win 19-17. But we'll honestly spend the bulk of today's episode talking about Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot and why Raheem Morris is going to stay and whether that's the right move for this Falcon team moving forward, and why Terry Fontenot is not going to stay and why that is definitely the right move moving forward for this Falcon team. But let's talk about this Week 18 matchup where Falcons special teams and defense kind of won them the day. The offense struggled for most of this game. It was very similar to the Falcons' win over the Saints in 2024. Their only win over the Saints, which also was at home, if I'm not mistaken, in that matchup. But you got, special teams. Zane Gonzalez made 4 field goals. You had a block punt from Jamie Robinson that helped, I believe, set up a score. You got an onside recovery from Kyle Pitts as well. So the Falcons were able to get a boost from their special teams unit. You got a boost from your defense. You had multiple sacks in this game, 2 of which came from James Pierce Jr., which pushed him over double-digit sacks, much to my chagrin, pushing a certain agenda here on this podcast. But no, kudos to James Pierce Jr. getting double-digit sacks. We love to see it. We do absolutely love to see it, even though I'm not enthusiastic, maybe not as enthusiastic about it as Jarvis Davis was on the Falcon squad show, just because it goes so much against an agenda I've been pushing on this podcast. But shout out to James Pierce Jr. And that's a testament to this Falcons defense overall in this pass rush. Revitalized Falcons pass rush, finished the season, I believe, with 57 sacks, which is a new franchise record. Unfortunately, the one time the Falcons actually have a legit, top of the league pass rush comes in a season like this. More on that later when we talk about Raheem Morris. We also saw the defense force 2 turnovers. You had an early AJ Terrell forced fumble on an Xavier Watts fumble recovery on a pass to Juwan Johnson. I believe it was the first offensive play of the game for the Saints. The Falcons were able to force a turnover. Then you had, more critically, D. Alford's game-sealing interception with about 3 minutes left in the game. D. Alford was able to pick off a Tyler Shuck pass, return it 59 yards. I don't think the Falcons win this game without that. That sets up Zane Gonzalez's last 4th field goal of the game and puts the Falcons up 19-10. At that point, the Saints do go down the field, score to make it 19-17, and then Kyle Pitts recovers the onside to seal that win. But, the Saints were driving on that drive before Alford stepped in front of that pass and picked it off. And there's a very good probability that if he doesn't pick off that pass, the Saints potentially go up 17-16 if they do wind up scoring a touchdown there. And with, under 3 minutes to go in the game or whatever it would have been, not a whole lot of confidence that the Falcons offense would have been able to move the ball down the field and score, given the type of performances that they had in this game. Bijan Robinson was shut down for the most part in this game. Drake London and Kyle Pitts did have some signature plays in this game. You did see glimpses of the old, healthy Drake London in this game with a couple of catches, a 37-yard catch early in the 3rd quarter that set up a field goal there. The Falcons and Saints did even it out. If you listen to the crossover Thursday with myself and Locked On Saints host Ross Jackson, we talked about key to victory being an even 3rd quarter for this Falcon team. Well, it was 3-3 in the 3rd quarter, and that was much needed. Falcons had the 1st quarter lead. The Saints seemed to, outside of that Alford interception, see to control a big chunk of the 4th quarter as well. And so you needed that even third quarter. So the Falcons did deliver on that. Drake London helped set up that field goal with a big 37-yard catch where he just sort of mossed whoever the Saints DB was. And then Kyle Pitts really came on strong with some crucial catches in the second half as well. But other than that, the offense really did not do a whole lot in this game. And that gets us to the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, right? And this was a hard game to kind of judge on the chaos meter because I don't think Kirk Cousins played particularly well, but like nothing really stood out to me in his performance in a positive or negative way. It was just kind of a middle of the road game. And sort of, I'm like, is that a level 1 or a level 2? Ultimately, I'm going to go with a level 2. But for those of you not familiar with the Kirk Cousins chaos meter, it is something that was bequeathed to us by Locked On Vikings host Luke Braun 2 years ago. And Kirk being a chaotic quarterback, there's 5 levels to the chaos meter. 1 is Kirk being very conservative. Level 2 is him doing an effective job managing the game. Level 3 is the peak version of Kirk Cousins, the best version of Kirk Cousins, where you're getting the good managerial skills at the quarterback position, but you're getting just a little hint of chaos that bumps Kirk to a higher level. Level 4 is there's too much chaos. We had a level 4 performance for Kirk last week. And then level 5 is the chaos has reached the point where now we're talking about benching Kirk for another quarterback. Last year, that was Michael Penix, of course. This year, due to Michael Penix's injury, that prompted Kirk Cousins to be elevated off the bench for Mike Cousins. It's really Easton Stick and Kyle Trask are the guys that you're benching Kirk Cousins for, which I don't think, I didn't think we were going to get there. We did not get there this season for a level 5 game for Kirk Cousins. Kirk being much smarter with the football. So to me, ultimately, the kind of the default is a level 2. Like Kirk was fine. It didn't feel like Kirk was the problem in this game offensively. With the Falcons shortcomings, like certainly did not play a great game of good football, but also I don't think played an especially bad game of football. You had, some missed throws, you had some poor blocking. You just overall did not have a very cohesive offense. And we've seen that kind of be the theme in like 3 out of the 4 games that Zach Robinson, the Falcons offensive coordinator, has had against the Saints over these last 2 seasons, where this offense has really struggled, as I mentioned in that earlier game last year. And then we saw a similar thing in that Week 10 matchup with the Falcons when once they only scored like 17-ish points or something like that. And then they got off to a really slow start that game and really struggled to finish drives in that game, although special teams could also be, Wegu missed a number of kicks in that game. But, and then, this year was the one game where, that Week 12 game was the one game where Zach Robinson's offense was really effective against the Saints. And to me, a large part of that was because the Falcons broke tendencies by going to a much more under center play action heavy offense than they had shown to date under Zach Robinson. I think that caught the Saints off guard, and the Falcons were able to take advantage of that, even without any sort of truly like standout performances. That was probably Darnell Mooney's best game. This was probably Darnell Mooney's second best game of the season, and he only had 3 catches for 20 yards or something like that. So, offense didn't step up, but the defense did. Special teams did as well. It's probably too little too late for Marquise Williams, but let's get into the big topic of the day, of the weekend, and probably will be the next several days here on the podcast, which is what is the fallout when it comes to firing certain decision makers in Atlanta, talking about the general manager, Terry Fontenot, talking about the head coach, Raheem Morris, and we'll talk about Raheem, who seems like, this 4-game winning streak to close out the season was just enough to save his job, and we'll break down why I don't like that, but we'll try to understand what Arthur Blank is thinking as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. So kicking off the new year, you want to have that good feeling. And honestly, hydration is an easy win when it comes to good feelings. When you stay on top of your hydration, your energy, your focus, your mood all level up. But if you're looking to level up from just plain water, try DripDrop, our proud sponsor today. It's a doctor-developed, proven fast hydration system that helps your body and mind work better. It uses a precise ratio of electrolytes and glucose for rapid absorption, delivering 3 times the electrolytes and half the sugar of leading sports drinks. It also tastes great, comes in 16 original flavors, 8 zero sugar options to choose from. I had some DripDrop over the Christmas holiday. And let's say a couple of family members went a little harder on Christmas Eve than they intended to, and needed to be well hydrated the next day. And DripDrop, I was like, here, put this in your water after your cup of coffee in the morning. And they highly recommend it. Let's just say the passion fruit flavor is highly recommended in the Freeman household. So right now, DripDrop is offering you, our listeners, 20% off your first order if you want to give it a try. Go to DripDrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That's DripDrop.com, promo code LOCKEDONNFL for 20% off. Stock up now at DripDrop.com and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Today's episode is also brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or jumping into player projections for the very first time, trying something new can feel like a challenge, but it's easy on Prize Picks, where it's always feels good to be right. With high-pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every single night, the action never slows down, and Prize Picks is going to let you stay in control of that action because they are the daily fantasy app that lets you build lineups based off of player stat projections. No drafts, no waiting, just pick more or less and play your way. And you can play so many different ways with a huge range of unique stat options like yards and fantasy score, 3 points made, whatever fits your strategy. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL, and you'll get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it is good to be right. And before we continue today's episode, I want to thank each and every one of you that is an everydayer of Locked On Falcons and so many other shows across the Locked On Podcast Network. You are the reason why Locked On is now the #1 sports podcast network in the galaxy. And if you want to level up from just being, an everydayer that we all appreciate and adore, and you want to, show more, you can join the Everydayer Club at the link in the description below for $5 a month, $50 a year. You get premium exclusive access to an ad-free version of Locked On Falcons, exclusive Discord channel, merch store, and so many other perks. And you can find that in the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. So if you missed the rumor mill that's come out over the last couple of days, particularly on Saturday, a lot of NFL insiders, Diana Rossini of The Athletic, Albert Breer, Sports Illustrated, Adam Schefter of ESPN, so many are basically suggesting that Raheem Morris is safe. And I think with this Week 18 win, it does feel like that is going to continue to be the situation, that the conjecture among NFL insiders, and we talked about this earlier in the week, where NFL insiders probably are a little bit more trustworthy when it comes to accurately projecting what Arthur Blank is going to do as opposed to what Terry Fontenot winds up doing. But with this 4-game win streak, it probably secures Raheem Morris's job. Now, my personal opinion, as you've heard me say a number of times over the last month, I think the Falcons should move on from Raheem Morris. I don't think this 4-game win streak is particularly meaningful for the Falcons, because when you're looking at how the Falcons performed across these 4 games, right? Obviously, they played well enough to win all 4 games, but you're not really looking at like an elite version of Falcons football that you're saying like, oh yes, if we just replicate what we did over these last 4 games for the next 17 games, we're going to be a successful football team. That you have a dominant first half against the Rams. And then after that, like, it's just like a penalty-ridden game against the Bucs, almost collapses against the Cardinals and Saints, almost collapse against the Rams. It's not a whole lot that you're sitting here writing home about. Wait, did we collapse against the Cardinals or did we come back? One of these games we came back in the fourth quarter. I can't remember which game it was. So I apologize, guys. They all kind of blur together. So if I misspoke on that one. But one of those games, they did come back in the fourth quarter. I just can't remember which one it was. But like, you're looking at it and you're like, what is the selling point in these 4 games that we're really being like, yes, more of this, please, with Raheem Morris? Because we've talked about this before with Raheem Morris, where it's like, what is the selling point of Raheem Morris as a head coach? Again, this is not. I like Raheem as a person. I like the bravado. I just wish he was a better coach. Like, that's really what it is. And like, you don't get the quality clock or game management that you typically want in a head coach. you get the team playing up to their opponents in primetime, but then you get the team playing down to their opponents whenever they face a team that's not in primetime, right? This year they were 4-1 in primetime games. They were 2-7 on in Sunday 1:00 games, right? They got their second win today against the Saints this year. And so, are you going to trust in Raheem's ability to hire coordinators, right? He's, got the Ulbrich hire, right? But only after getting the Jimmy Lake hire wrong. I'm sure plenty of you have your opinions on Zach Robinson, and generally it seems like most of you do not think highly of Zach Robinson as a play caller. Marquise Williams is probably going to be a fall guy for the special teams underperforming this year after the Falcons spent so much this offseason investing in that unit. I think Zach Robinson is probably going to keep his job, and not because he's necessarily coached at a level to deserve it. I think Zach has done a better job in 2025 than he did in 2024 as a play caller, but it was very much hit and miss this season. And I certainly think you saw very little things from Zach Robinson that makes you go like, oh, this is a good play caller. This is a competent play caller is really where you're at with Zach Robinson. And the reason why I don't think the Falcons are going to fire Zach Robinson is that it's going to be difficult for Raheem to hire a quality offensive coordinator that's going to be significantly better than Zach Robinson, because he's going into what we all see as a lame duck year. And it's like, who are you going to be able to attract that's better than Zach Robinson? That person is going to have probably a real personal relationship with Raheem, similar to what Jeff Ulbrich has. And there's just not that many guys out there that are that. We'll see what happens in Miami. But it's basically Mike McDaniel is probably the one person that you could say, if he gets fired in Miami, you could theoretically, say, oh, that guy would be an upgrade over Zach Robinson, which he probably would be. I don't know if Mike McDaniel's solving the problems that the Falcons are looking to solve, but that will be a separate conversation if we get to that bridge, we'll cross it. But I think you'll probably see this team hire some type of senior offensive assistant. I've thrown out the name John Gruden. That makes sense to try to, buttress, buoy, bulwark, whatever the word is, Zach Robinson. If you run it back with Zach Robinson, as I assume they will. And if you don't run it back with Zach Robinson, do you feel really good about a first-year play caller? Again, who you're going to get that is an established, play caller that has built a top 5, top 10 offense. So. Are you going to have a first-time play caller, a first-year play caller, given the circumstances around this team? Who's going to be the quarterback, right? Is it going to be Kirk Cousins? Is it going to be Michael Penix? Is it going to be somebody else? So we'll see on that front. But, overall, if the Falcons are going to wind up keeping Raheem, mostly because of how this 4-game winning streak, which is the first 4-game winning streak the Falcons have had since 2019, coincidentally, the Falcons won their last 4 games that year. That saved Dan Quinn's job. I remember being on this podcast, being, a week or two before that, being like, oh, yeah, Dan Quinn's going to get fired. And then the Falcons were like, no, we're keeping him. The parallels are endless. We've talked endlessly about those parallels over the last couple of weeks between the Falcons' 2025 season and the 2019 season. And hopefully, for the Falcons' sake, there won't be too many parallels between the Falcons' 2026 season under Raheem Morris as there was in the 2020 season under Dan Quinn, and then subsequently Raheem Morris when Dan Quinn started the season 0-5. So it feels like classic half measures for the Falcons. It's classic case to me of the Falcons continuing to think that they're really close, because they show up for a couple of Monday night games, right? And they think they're a better team than what they are. And, I know that falls on deaf ears to a large portion of my listeners, but I've said this many times in the past, so I'll say it again for those of you that are relatively new here. I don't think you look at a team's best 2 or 3 games and think that that's what that team is. I think when you look at, now a 17-game season, but previously a 16-game season, you basically take a team's 4 best games and you kind of throw them away. You take their 4 worst games and you throw them away, and you look at those middle 8 when it was 16 games, now middle 9 games. And that's really going to give you a much more accurate assessment of what a team is most of the time, right? Most of the season. That's what they really are. That middle 9 is what this team is. And this year's Falcons team, that their middle 9 is, a 4-5 team or whatever, which is like, a mediocre, average team that's going to win some 1-score games, is going to lose some 1-score games. but like there's nothing really that makes you get excited about what this team could be. But, they're going to convince themselves they're really close, as they have done for the last 8 years. We'll upgrade the wide receiver, we'll upgrade the cornerback on day 2 of the draft or whatever, and that'll get us over the hump. And it hasn't worked for 8 years now, but 9 times a charm. And we'll see if that pays off for the Falcons. As you can tell from my tone, I don't think it will, but I'll be called a hater as I am. And then 11 months from now, we'll probably be sitting here in a similar predicament where it's like, yeah, it didn't work out. Oh, who could have possibly seen that coming? But we'll see on that front. So those are my thoughts on Raheem potentially keeping his job. But, Raheem, the NFL Insider seems to suggest that Raheem is going to stick around, but they don't seem to be suggesting that Terry Fontenot is going to be sticking around, because the Falcons are finishing with 5 consecutive losing seasons. And that is, a dismissal that I do think makes total sense. I know I'm in the minority of that opinion. I think the vast majority of Falcon fans, and I've done polls here on Locked On Falcons YouTube, that seem to suggest most people want the team to fire. If you're going to fire one of these guys, it would be Raheem rather than Terry. But I'm going to explain to you why Terry has to go. I think Raheem should also go, but Terry certainly has to go, and we'll break that down as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. So this episode is sponsored by Betterhelp. The new year doesn't necessarily require a new you, maybe just a less burden you, and we all carry things that weigh us down and hold us back. And therapy can help identify which of those things that you need to let go of by offering an unbiased perspective to better understand your relationships, your motivations, and your emotions. And that's where BetterHelp comes in, making it easy to get matched online with a qualified therapist who can help you work through whatever is holding you back. It's easy. Just answer a few questions and you'll get matched with a fully licensed therapist, usually within 48 hours. When I signed up for BetterHelp a few years back, I specifically wanted a person of color for my therapist, just so there are things that I don't necessarily have to explain to my therapist as we talk through all the various things in relationships and motivations and emotions and whatnot. And the beautiful thing about BetterHelp is that you can switch therapists at any time if that therapist isn't right for you. So BetterHelp makes it easy to get matched with a therapist, get matched online with a qualified therapist. So sign up today and you'll get 10% off at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's betterhelp.com/lockedon. Today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time, right? There's nothing like being in the game, the crowd noise, the energy, the cheering alongside all the other fans. Watching at home is great, but, being in that stadium hits a little bit different. But it's frustrating because it's not always easy to get into the stadium and get tickets, because you got to worry about queues and logins and watching prices change at checkout. And Game Time is going to take that guesswork out of buying tickets and give that advantage back to the fans. The app is incredibly intuitive. Browsing, comparing, and buying tickets is easy and takes just minutes. And what you see is what you get. The price on the app is the price you pay. You don't have to worry about hidden fees at checkout. And, we love the panoramic seat views. So, you get to see your seat before you buy, so there are no surprises. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets, particularly for the college football playoff. You got the Peach Bowl coming up, or any sports concert or event near you with Game Time by downloading the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today and get back to being there live. So wrapping up today's Locked On Falcons, excuse me, guys. It sounds like all the NFL insiders are like, Raheem is much safer than Terry Fontenot. That totally makes sense. I don't think there's a world where you can have 5 losing seasons in a row and keep your job. I hear that Les Snead is one of the rare exceptions to that had 5 losing seasons in LA and kept his job. And then I imagine had Sean McVay arrived there and that led to, that streak ending. And we know they were eventually able to win a Super Bowl there. I'm sure there are plenty of people that are of the opinion that if we just hire the right coach, Terry Fontenot can achieve that. And I'm like, sure, but Sean McVay ain't coming through that door. So good luck with that. I say good riddance. I've been very vocally against Terry Fontenot. I know a lot of people like to praise Terry Fontenot because of the success of this 2025 draft class. Shout out again to James Pierce and so many others. Xavier Watts. We'll see, one of those guys wins Defensive Rookie of the Year, but it's too little too late, in my opinion. And I've explained before why I don't think Terry Fontenot's methodology is a good methodology for the Atlanta Falcons. I've compared it before to, he came from the Saints system where Mickey Loomis was the general manager. And Mickey Loomis, over his time in New Orleans over the last 20 plus years, I think it's almost 25 years now, has been one of the most aggressive trading up GMs in the NFL. And that strategy for the 15 years that Mickey Loomis overlapped with Sean Payton and Drew Brees, that strategy made sense. And I've explained before, because of the presence of those two individuals, the top 5 quarterback, Hall of Fame caliber quarterback in Drew Brees, and one of the best play callers in the NFL, probably a top 5 play caller in his prime in Sean Payton. That raised the floor for the Saints offensively. And as we know, offense drives team success, and that allowed the Saints over that 15-year period to average about 9 or 10 wins every single year. And so that was consistently their floor, with, maybe like 3 years of the exception where they finished below that floor. But that was consistently their floor. And so it made sense that for aggressive with trading up, because if you knew you had a floor of 9 or 10 wins, if you made those big aggressive swings in the draft, trading up and hit on those big aggressive swings, that could potentially raise your ceiling to turn you from a team that you knew was going to consistently win your division every year, that you could pretty much count on most years to win your division. Obviously, they did not always win their division, but usually when they didn't, they still finished in second place. You would take these big swings, and if you hit on those swings, that would change you from a division winner to a potential Super Bowl contender. And so that philosophy, that methodology made sense in New Orleans because you had the establishment of Sean Payton and Drew Brees. The Falcons don't have that. They don't have that high floor as a football team because they don't have the same, solid base and foundation with an offensive-minded play caller like Sean Payton, with a high-level quarterback like Drew Brees. You saw this reflected in Atlanta with Matt Ryan here. Even if you want to argue that Matt Ryan and Drew Brees were on a similar level as far as quarterback play, is the Falcons' floor was consistently under Matt Ryan more of a 7 or 8 win team, right? In large part because they didn't have quite the level of play caller that Sean Payton was outside of those, that year and a half where Kyle Shanahan was cooking here in Atlanta. And so Terry Fontenot, basically the moral of that story, guys, is to basically say that Terry Fontenot bringing a Mickey Loomis approach to Atlanta doesn't make any sense. And when we had this conversation a year ago where it's like everybody wanted to fire Terry Fontenot then, and I came on this podcast and was like, I want to see if Terry can dig himself out of the hole. And he dug himself even deeper into the hole, right? The Falcons had limited cap space, limited draft picks, and Terry Fontenot was like, we're trading away even more draft picks, and we're going to be even more up against it from a cap standpoint the following year, coming out of the year. And it's like, why are we sitting here suggesting that Terry Fontenot should come back just because he hit on a couple of draft picks, because he drafted off of consensus for like the first time in 4 years, like, what is it? I don't get that, but I know people just, they look at James Pierce's 10.5 sacks and they go like, that's a good GM, because they just look at, GM's job is to hit on draft picks and hit on free agents. And because Terry's hit on enough of those guys in people's eyes, that's the job. And it's like, the job is building a process that is going to garner good results. And basically Terry Fontenot's, all that to explain is Terry Fontenot has a very flawed process. It doesn't fit the Atlanta Falcons in the state of this team. They're not in a position where they should be taking these big home run swings. They need to be in the position where they need to build up the floor of this football team so that they can raise the floor of this football team. It's one of the reasons why you hear me talk so much about the quarterback, because it's like, if this team wants to establish that firm foundation of success for future, they got to hit on the quarterback. And we'll see if Michael Penix is the answer to that. But, understandably, I think you can look at the last year and a half and be very skeptical of that. And ultimately, those big swings that Terry Fontenot's made over the last 2 years, you can sit there and say, hey, It paid dividends in one aspect of the team in James Pierce in the pass rush this offseason. That's one. If you want to say he hit on that, okay, great. That's one big swing that he's made contact with. Congratulations. He didn't hit it out the park, right? I know you can look at James Pierce's success in the pass rush success and say, oh, he absolutely hit a home run. Did he? Because this is still a middling defense, right? But we're not going to get into all that on today's episode. So, but you take all these big swings and you whiff time and time again, there's going to be consequences to that. And obviously it didn't pay off for the Falcons. Terry Fontenot has been a big part of we're one piece away. I don't think he's the only piece of that. I think that's a systemic issue here in the building in Atlanta. And hopefully, people like Matt Ryan are going to change that. We'll see. Basically, that's the reason why that's the bulk of my skepticism. It's like, is Matt Ryan going to change that? Is Matt Ryan going to look at this team and be like, oh, yeah, they're not that close. But, if he does that, then I think he'll be successful. If he doesn't do that, then it's just going to be more of the same. But we'll see on that front. And obviously, we have a big day tomorrow around the NFL with Black Monday. It sounds like a lot of teams are not going to be as quick to pull the plug on their coaches. I think a lot of teams are basically going to wait and see what happens, as we mentioned earlier on the podcast earlier this week, with what happens with Mike Tomlin, what happens with Jim Harbaugh, Sean McDermott, Kevin Stefanski. It sounds like only Kevin Stefanski is going to be available, and teams, I think, are going to quietly sort of put out feelers and being like, can we land Kevin Stefanski? And if the answer is no, then we're going to keep our head coach, right? We're not going to fire our guy that's, on the hot seat. We're going to run it back with those guys and see, hopefully have a better coaching cycle and better candidates next year rather than just firing the guys and usually having the 7 or 8 openings that we typically have around the NFL. And this year we might get 4, maybe 5. We'll see on that front. So obviously this is going to be a continuing developing story. We'll have you covered here on Locked On Falcons and see what's what with Raheem Morris and Terry Fontenot. So that's going to do it for us here, guys. But obviously that will be our continued coverage over the next 24 hours to see if anything happens with those guys. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check out Locked On NFL for your second listen to get all the fallout from all the Week 18 action. And, of course, check out the Everydayer Club if you want to level up your everydayerness and get that ad-free version of the podcast, as well as Discord access, merch store for Locked On. It's all available for you at the link in the description below at lockedonfalcons.supercast.com. It's for $5 a month or $50 a year. So go check it out. That's going to do it for us here, guys. Appreciate you. Shout out to the Everydayers. Continue to make us your first listen on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. It is all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every